Hello and welcome back to One Chord a Week. Today's video is going to be short and simple, but before that, you should certainly 100% watch last week's video on the 7th flat 5 chord, because everything I explained about how we're going to treat altered chords and why we have specific videos on these two chords and so on is in that video. So make sure you watch it either before or after you watch this video, and that will make this chord extremely simple for you. The Augmented Seventh chord, also known as the dominant sharp 5 or 7 sharp 5 chord, is very closely related to last week's chord, the 7 flat 5, but to me it doesn't sound as appealing. So its resolutions are not really as satisfying to me, and the sound itself of the chord, it's a bit off to my ear. And so, I'm going to show it to you anyway, of course. You should form your own opinion on it. And in any case, it's good to know chords, because even if you don't actually use them, you'll have an understanding of the possibilities of even your simple improvisations. You can tap into the sound of these chords whenever it's allowed. So for example, I play rock music, and a lot of chords are kind of out of the question in a traditional sense, because if I use distortion, I can get a lot further than sus2 chords or maybe some 9 chords. I can go that far with distortion if I'm using distorted guitars. But if I know the chords, I know how they're built, I know their sound, I've studied them really hard, then I have access to that sound, even if I'm spreading it out, even if the chord is quite simple, but then on top of it, I can imply the more complex chords by simply note choices, okay? So it's a bit strange that I spend so much time learning chords and teaching chords, actually. I find them extremely fascinating, but then in a practical way, sometimes I'm limited to the amount of them I can play. Now, if I'm playing other things, if I'm playing on a piano, if I'm playing clean guitar, if I'm doing synth music that I like to do, then I can have access to all those sounds more easily. But for example, in my specific sound, then I am limited, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that I shouldn't learn chords, all right? So this chord, the 7 sharp 5 chord, is very often used in jazz music. You won't see it in a lot of other styles of music. It's contemplated in classical, but it's really, a kind of a fusion-y kind of sound. But I'm going to show you how to build it, and then we'll get to the sound section. You will make up your own mind about it. The formula for the 7 sharp 5 chord is very simple, of course. It's basically an augmented triad with an added minor 7th. Here's the augmented chord. You should watch this as a complement to this chord here. And another way you can look at it is to start with a regular dominant 7th chord. Again, here's a link to that video. And then you just raise the 5th. Whatever you do, the result is the same. You're going to end up with your augmented triad, which in this case is C, E in the 3rd, and G sharp as the augmented 5th. So these are the usual two major thirds in sequence. So we have a major third between C and E, and another major third between E and G sharp. That's our augmented triad. And then on top of that, we use the flat 7, which is, as you know, one whole step before the root or below the root. So if the root is C, 2 frets below that, that's our B flat. Okay, so the total of this is root, C, major third, E, G sharp is our augmented 5th, and then we have minor 7th, which is B flat. And that's it. Very simple formula. So it's not ugly or anything, it just, to me, sounds so edgy, not in a necessarily a good way, because it's just a bit overpowering, but it is a nice chord, and there's not much to say about this chord. The function is really the same as the one from last week, and the altered chords we're going to look at later. It's basically a substitute for a dominant 7th chord. So where do you find a dominant 7th chord? Usually, well, on the 5th chord or on the 5 of the chord progression. So if we're in C major, the 5 chord will be G7th, but instead of that G7, we could use the 7 sharp 5 or the augmented 7th chord, which is the one we're looking at today. So that resolution would go something like this. We have the G7 sharp 5, and you hear that pull wanting to go somewhere, and that somewhere is the resolution, okay? doesn't sound bad actually, you know, I feel bad now for saying that earlier. But I like, for example, better the version with the flat 9, which we'll look at in the future, but it's still a nice chord. Now, if you put this together with a 2, right, so we have the 2-5-1, which is the most typical progression, for example, in jazz music, then we would have our D minor. We would use D minor 7th in the 2, then we use G7 sharp 5. It's a beautiful build-up, and then you resolve to the 1. Okay, and what I'm doing is I'm trying to create an ascending chromatic line, and that comes from the D of the D minor to the E flat, or better said D sharp, my augmented 5th, and resolves to E. So we have D, D sharp, E. See, so that's basically the use for this, and as you see, it's in line with the altered chords and their function to add these movements. And so I don't know, it's not a bad chord by any means, but it's just, to me, it's not as appealing to the other one. But maybe I will reconsider after listening to myself playing that. I kind of like it actually. So maybe I discover something new in this series as well. All right, let's move on to how to play it on the fretboard. Very well, so here's 3 positions for this chord. The first one begins here on the 3rd fret of the 5th string, which is a good place to be if you're in C major or C minor or any kind of C. And we do this, we play the 3rd fret of the 5th string, that's our root. Then we go to the 6th fret with the little finger. It's a bit of a stretch, but not too bad. That's our augmented 5th. Then we play the 7th, again with the 1st finger. We're barring the 3rd fret. Then we play the major 3rd, which is E. And finally, we double the augmented 5th on the 4th fret of the 1st string. Pretty nice chord. Next, we go to the 8th fret. Again, it's something I try to do in every video. And here's the position. We play 8 on the 6th fret of the 8th fret of the 6th string. That's our C, that's a root. Then we skip a string. Make sure you don't play. We play the 7th here, the B flat, on the same fret, the 8th fret of the 4th string. And then we do this to have 2 9s on the 3rd and 2nd string. You can do it either with a little bar or use 2 fingers, whatever you want. And these notes will be the major 3rd and the augmented 5th. Very nice sounding. So I am definitely reconsidering this chord. For the final position, we go to the 10th fret of the 4th string. We have our root. Then we play the augmented 5th on the 13th fret of the 3rd string. That's G sharp. Then we have our 7th, which is B flat, on the 11th fret of the 2nd string. And finally, our major 3rd, E, on the 12th fret of the 1st. And that's it. That should get you started with this chord. In today's video, I won't go into too much detail about the scales because this will be repeated again for the altered chord, and it's kind of been introduced last week, but I will still give you a little bit of input on it just in case this is the first video you watch. If that's the case, make sure you go back and watch the whole series because there's a lot of chords to be learned, and even if you already know them, you might get some cool tricks out of them, of these videos. And so the first one would be the whole tone scale that we looked at a few times actually. And the whole tone scale is a scale that's made up of only whole steps. So it's one whole step after another. Right? It's pretty simple, but the obvious thing here, this scale is used for the augmented triads, and of course the basis for the augmented 7th chord is the augmented triad. So the triad is already taken care of. We have the root and the major 3rd and the augmented 5th, they're already part of the scale. But the good thing is that it also includes the flat 7. Why? Because the flat 7 is a whole step before the root. And because this scale is made up of only whole steps, it makes sense that I have my C, my E, my G sharp, and my B flat. So basically this scale fits the chord like a glove. It's exactly the chord, the scale that I need to play this. Right, it's perfect. And curiously enough, this scale also fits perfectly the other chord, which is the 7 flat 5, which sounds totally different in name, but it's actually quite similar. And the other scale that we should introduce is the altered scale. The altered scale is a bit complicated, and we'll save it for the altered video, but basically it's the last mode of the melodic minor scale. Okay, so it will be like this. Check out the notes. It's C. Let's play it up here, so if you're more familiar with this area of the neck. Okay, so we have C, D flat, and then we have E flat and E. So don't get confused by all this, just focus on the fact that we have the E, and we also have the flat 9 and the sharp 9, but we'll look at that in the future, all right? So for now, let's try to see if we are matching the notes of the scale to the notes of the chord, which is regular way of looking at if we can use a scale over a chord or not. So we have our third taken care of, and we have our perfect fifth taken care of. We also have a diminished fifth, which again will come into play later. And then as we continue the scale, we have our flat 7 or minor 7th and the root again, and then it starts over. Okay, so it's great because even though it has a bunch of strange notes, it has the notes that we need. It has the root, the major third, the augmented fifth, and the flat 7 or minor 7th. It also has the flat 9, the sharp 9, the flat 5. And so it's a scale, it's called an altered scale because it works with every altered chord, because it has the potential to fit any alterations in the 9th or on the 5th. But again, as I said, we'll look at that when we look at the complete altered chords. There will be a video dedicated to those with the 5th and the 9 and different combinations of alterations. So we'll save it for them. But for now, if you want to try it out, record yourself playing a 7 augmented chord and improvise. On the altered scale, which is the last mode of the melodic minor. All right, so this was a bit of a transition video because it's so similar to last week's, but it's also kind of similar to the big altered video that will be coming up. So just take it for what it is. It's a chord that's very easy to use. You just replace any dominant chord with it. Be mindful of the sharp 5. And if the scale section is a bit confusing to you, that's no problem. These chords really are not chords you strum and you improvise or play melodies over. You know, these are functional chords. They go from one place to another. That's what they're bridges for modulations, they're bridges for adding interest to a progression. It's not like you're gonna be for 1 minute trying to improvise on the altered scale probably. You're certainly free to try it. I certainly have, but you know, don't worry about it too much. You know, even if you don't understand these complex scales, you can just use the chord and use your ear. You could avoid the strange note, or you could just play without really knowing what it is. It's fine too. You know, the chords really are important as of themselves. You don't need to introduce all the other stuff. I teach you, you know, all the other stuff, how to use them and the formula and the scales. But really what counts is that you get the sound of the ear, the potential of that sound in your ear, and then you have it. You have it there, and as I said before at the beginning of the video, you can tap into it even if you don't actually play the chord. You can imply the chord simply with your choice of notes in your melodies or in the bass, or if you have a little accent played on a keyboard or something or another guitar, you can kind of point to that chord without having to completely commit to it. All right, so chords are very important. Even if you find a chord like this one that I don't personally use, maybe you say, well, I wouldn't use that. Still learn it as well as you would a major chord. Okay, the benefits are really endless. All right, so again, I hope you enjoyed the video and that you're enjoying the series, which is getting kind of long now. So I hope I'm not boring you. And if you enjoyed the series, please do subscribe, like, comment. It will really help me out. Maybe you can spread the word a little bit out there. If you are, you know, talking to other guitar players, maybe you could mention that there's a guy on the internet who's crazy and he's making all these videos about chords and other stuff. All right, thank you very much again for being here, and I will see you very soon with a new one. Bye bye.